I am Alina Baxter, and I just returned from hell, only to realize my heaven had been torched to the ground. For 9 months in the Middle East, every time the sirens wailed, the only thing keeping me sane was the image of this house in Naperville. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was my entire re-enlistment bonus, my sweat, and the blood I spilled so my parents could have a sanctuary for their old age. But standing at the driveway gate at 2 in the morning, with the October wind slapping my face, I saw a rusted iron chain wrapped tight around the door handles. No porch light, no sound of Dad's TV. Just a dead silence and a bright red sign that screamed, "Foreclosure disputed property." I called their phones, straight to voicemail. I pounded on Mrs. Ruth's door next door. She looked at me like she was seeing a ghost, then uttered words that shredded my heart more than any shrapnel ever could. "Alina, you don't know. Lucas sold everything, your parents. They are living out of the old truck in the Walmart parking lot." My world collapsed, but I did not fall. I chambered around in my mental rifle. The real war wasn't in the desert, it was right here. I drove the rental pickup through the silent streets of Naperville like I was dodging IEDs. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The town I grew up in, usually a picture of suburban peace with its manicured lawns and slumbering houses, now looked like a hostile foreign territory. Mrs. Ruth's words kept replaying in my head on an endless, agonizing loop. Walmart parking lot, living in the truck. I pulled into the Supercenter's lot. It was a vast sea of asphalt under the hum of high-voltage sodium lights. This was the only place in America that allowed people to park overnight without the cops knocking. A concrete purgatory for the displaced. I saw the contrast immediately, and it felt like a physical blow to the gut. On the left were the snowbirds, retirees in their $1 million Winnebago RVs, parked there to save a few bucks on a campground fee while traveling south. They were sleeping in heated comfort. And there, shoved into the darkest corner near the dumpster enclosures, was my father's old Ford F-150. It looked like a piece of scrap metal amidst a fleet of land yachts. I killed the engine and approached on foot. The wind cut through my jacket, but I was numb. I crept up to the passenger window, peering through the glass fogged up by human breath. What I saw inside broke me. My father, Robert Baxter, the man who once carried me on his shoulders, the man who was as sturdy as an oak tree, was curled up in the driver's seat. He looked shrunken. His beard was unkempt, his face gray and hollow. He was wearing 3 layers of flannel shirts. Beside him, my mother, Linda, was holding a plastic-wrapped sandwich from a gas station. She carefully unwrapped it and broke it in half. She didn't take a bite. She handed the bigger half to Dad. They ate slowly, catching every crumb that fell onto the dashboard as if it were gold dust. The interior of the cab was piled high with trash bags, their entire life reduced to plastic sacks. I knocked on the glass. Mom screamed. It wasn't a scream of recognition. It was the terrified yelp of a stray animal expecting to be kicked. She scrambled to hide the food, her eyes wide with panic. "No! We are leaving! Please don't tow us!" she cried out, her voice muffled by the glass. She thought I was private security. "Mom, it's me! It's Alina!" I shouted. Dad blinked, his eyes unfocused. He fumbled with the lock. When the door groaned open, the smell hit me. A stagnant mix of unwashed clothes, stale food, and the sharp, metallic scent of despair. "Alina?" Dad wheezed. You're home?" I didn't say a word. I pulled them out of that metal coffin. Mom hugged me, but her body felt wrong. She was frail, just skin and bones shivering under a thin coat. "I'm sorry, Alina," she sobbed into my chest, her tears soaking my shirt. "I'm so sorry. I couldn't save the house. I failed you." I drove them to the nearest Motel 6. I didn't care about the cost. I forced them into a warm shower and ordered hot food from a 24-hour diner. Watching them eat scrambled eggs with shaking hands, the rage began to replace the sorrow. It started in my stomach and rose to my throat, cold and metallic. "How?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "How did this happen?" The story spilled out like battery acid. Lucas, My baby brother. The one I sent money to every month. He had told them the foreclosure papers were just insurance updates. Dad's eyesight was failing, and he trusted his son. Why wouldn't he? He said it was an investment, Dad whispered, looking at his hands. Sports betting. He said he had a system. When he lost, he sold the deed. He forged your name as a cosigner. But the dagger in my heart came next. Mom wiped her eyes with a napkin. When the sheriff came to evict us, Lucas was there. The new owners asked about us. Lucas laughed. He told them. Her voice broke. He told them, "Don't worry about the old folks. They're senile. Just put their junk on the curb, they'll wander off eventually." The room went silent. The hum of the motel refrigerator sounded like a roaring jet engine. He hadn't just stolen their home. He had stolen their dignity. He had treated the people who gave him life like expired produce to be thrown in the trash. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neon sign buzzing in the dark. I wasn't crying anymore. The tears had dried up, replaced by a clarity I hadn't felt since my first combat patrol. I checked the bank app on my phone. I had enough for a war chest. The enemy wasn't in the desert anymore. He was right here in Naperville, probably sleeping in a warm bed paid for with my parents' blood. My hand tightened around the phone. I know I'm not the only one who feels this fire burning inside. If you stand with me, if you believe that betraying your parents is a crime that cannot be forgiven, please hit that like button to give me strength. And tell me in the comments, type justice, if you are ready to see Lucas pay for every single tear they shed. Lucas Baxter had made a fatal tactical error. He thought he was dealing with his big sister. He forgot he was dealing with a staff sergeant. Operation Homefront had just begun. Finding Lucas was easier than tracking a goat herder in the Kandahar Mountains. He had always been sloppy with operational security. I didn't need a satellite feed. I just needed the monthly statement for the emergency credit card I had foolishly entrusted to him 3 years ago. The most recent charge was for a pizza delivery at an apartment complex named The Vistas, just 5 miles from where our parents were currently shivering in a truck cab. I parked the rental truck next to a late-model BMW. This complex was nice. It had a heated pool and a clubhouse. Amenities paid for with the equity of a home my father spent 40 years paying off. I walked up to Unit 3B. I could hear the bass of a video game thumping through the door. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I checked the handle. Locked. I used a simple tension wrench from my multi-tool. It took me less than 10 seconds. I slammed the door open so hard the handle punched a hole in the drywall. The smell hit me first. A suffocating cloud of high-grade marijuana, stale beer, and rotting garbage. It was the scent of decay masked by expensive cologne. Lucas was sprawled on a leather sectional that looked brand new. He was wearing a headset, staring at a 60-inch television screen where colorful explosions were flashing. He was surrounded by a fortress of empty pizza boxes and glass bottles. He didn't even turn his head. He thought I was the delivery driver. "Yo, doors open!" he yelled over the sound of gunfire from the TV. "Just drop the wings on the counter. Did you bring the ranch dipping sauce this time?" I walked over and ripped the power cord of the television out of the wall. The screen went black. The room plunged into silence, except for the hum of the air conditioner set to a crisp 68 degrees. "Hey, what the hell, man? I was in a ranked match." Lucas jumped up, spinning around, ready to fight. He froze when he saw me. He saw the combat boots first, then the camouflage cargo pants, and finally, my face. "Alina?" He blinked, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. "Oh, it's the war hero. You're back." There was no fear, no shame. He just smirked, that entitled, arrogant twist of the lips that made my hands itch to strangle him. He collapsed back onto the sofa, grabbing a bottle of beer. "I thought you were stuck in the desert for another month," he said, taking a swig. "If you came for money, you're late. The market has been brutal. My investment strategy hit a snag." "Investment strategy?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. I kicked a pile of losing parlay tickets from a sports betting app scattered on the floor. "You call blowing our parents' life savings on DraftKings an investment?" Lucas rolled his eyes. It's called day trading sports futures, Alina. You wouldn't understand. It's high risk, high reward. I just had a bad streak. You sold the house, I said, stepping closer. You forged my signature. You threw mom and dad onto the street like garbage. I didn't throw them anywhere, he snapped, his tone suddenly defensive. I liquidated an asset. That house was falling apart anyway. And honestly, it was my inheritance. I just accessed it a little early. Why wait until they're dead to enjoy the money? The air left my lungs. Inheritance? They are still alive, Lucas. They are sleeping in a parking lot eating cold sandwiches while you drink $50 bourbon. I grabbed the front of his designer hoodie and hauled him to his feet. He was taller than me, but he had no core strength. He was soft, doughy from years of sitting in chairs while I was marching with an 80-pound ruck. Let go of me! He shoved my hands away, stumbling back. Then, he played the card I hated the most. The victim card. You don't get to judge me, he screamed, his face turning red. You left! You ran off to play soldier for 3 years. Who had to listen to Dad tell the same boring war stories 1,000 times? Who had to drive Mom to her eye appointments? Me. I had to deal with their toxic negativity every single day. It was a hostile environment, Alina. I deserved that money for putting up with them. He truly believed it. He believed that doing the bare minimum for his family was a burden that required a 6-figure paycheck. He had twisted his laziness into martyrdom. I looked around the room. I saw a pair of limited edition sneakers on the shelf. Air Jordans that cost more than Dad's truck. I saw a new iPhone, a drone, a VR headset. Every single item in this room was a piece of my father's sweat and my mother's tears. I wanted to break his jaw. My training told me to neutralize the threat, but breaking him physically would be too easy. It would heal. I needed to break his world. I took a step back. I pulled out my phone. What are you doing? Lucas asked, nervous for the first time. Documenting the crime scene, I said calmly. I snapped photos of the drugs on the table. I took pictures of the expensive electronics. I took a close-up of him, red-faced and high. You think you're tough? Lucas sneered, trying to regain his composure. Go ahead. Tell Mom. She won't do anything. She knows I have anxiety. She won't let you hurt me. I'm not Mom, I said, putting the phone away. I'm Staff Sergeant Baxter, and you just declared war on the wrong soldier. I turned my back on him. Get out of my house, he screamed after me, and don't expect me to visit those old losers. I walked out the door, the sound of his voice fading behind me. I didn't slam the door this time. I left it wide open. Let the neighbors see the rot inside. I had the evidence. Now, I needed the gavel. It was time to go to court. I approached the recovery of my family's home like an intelligence operation. Emotions were a liability. Evidence was the only currency that mattered. For 3 days, I did not sleep. I sifted through the garbage bins behind the apartment complex where Lucas lived, ignoring the stench of rotting takeout and stale beer. I was looking for paper trails. I found them at the bottom of a trash bag. Crumpled sheets of notebook paper where Lucas had practiced forging my signature over and over again. It looked like the handwriting of a child trying to mimic an adult, shaky but determined. I pulled the security footage from Mrs. Ruth's Ring camera next door. It showed Lucas meeting with a notary public on the front porch while my parents were at a doctor's appointment. I saw him laughing, shaking hands, and signing a document that ended 40 years of my father's hard work. It was a federal crime. Fraud, forgery, violation of the Service Members Civil Relief Act. When I laid the evidence out on the motel bed, I expected my parents to be relieved. I expected anger at the son who had deceived them. Instead, my mother looked at the stack of papers and turned pale. He could go to prison for this, she whispered, her hands trembling. He committed a felony, Mom, I said, my voice steady. He stole your house. He stole my credit. Mom dropped to her knees. She grabbed my hand, her tears hot against my skin. Please, Alina, don't send him to jail. He's your brother. He's just lost. If you press charges, it will ruin his life. I pulled my hand away, feeling a cold knot tighten in my stomach. She was begging me to save the predator who had left her homeless. The hearing at the DuPage County Courthouse took place 2 weeks later. The air in courtroom 402 smelled of floor wax and old wood. Lucas showed up wearing a suit that was clearly borrowed. The sleeves were too long, covering his knuckles. He had shaved and combed his hair, trying to play the part of the misunderstood youth. But Judge Miller was not an audience for Lucas's theater. I had read his bio. Miller was a retired Marine Corps lieutenant colonel. When my lawyer presented the evidence, the forged deed and my deployment orders, Judge Miller's face hardened like stone. He looked at the paperwork, then at me, and finally at Lucas. "Mr. Baxter," the judge said, his voice deep and resonating without a microphone. "You are aware that the Service Members Civil Relief Act protects active duty personnel from civil proceedings while they are serving their country? You forged the signature of a staff sergeant while she was overseas protecting your right to stand here and lie." Lucas shrank in his seat. "Your Honor, I intended to pay it back. It was a family misunderstanding." "It is not a misunderstanding," Judge Miller snapped. "It is a disgrace. You preyed on the elderly and the deployed. You are a shame to the name you carry." The gavel came down with a sound like a pistol shot. The sale of the house was declared void ab initio, invalid from the start. The house was ours again. I felt a surge of triumph, a clean, sharp victory, but it lasted less than a minute. "However," the judge continued, picking up a handwritten letter from his bench, "I have received a character statement and a plea for leniency from the victims, Robert and Linda Baxter." My head snapped toward my parents in the gallery. Mom was looking down at her lap. Dad was staring at the wall. They had written to the judge behind my back. "Because of their plea," Judge Miller said, looking at me with something like pity in his eyes, "I am suspending the prison sentence. 2 years of probation. 500 hours of community service. You are lucky, son. Your parents have more mercy than you deserve." We walked out of the courthouse into the gray afternoon light. Lucas stopped at the bottom of the concrete stairs. He loosened his tie and looked at me. The fear from the courtroom was gone, replaced by that familiar, arrogant smirk. "See?" he whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Mom and Dad saved me. They still love me best, Alina. You can't court-martial love." He walked away whistling, free to go back to his life, while I stood there, holding the court order that felt heavier than a rucksack. We moved back into the house the next day. It should have been a celebration, but the air inside was heavy, thick with unspoken accusations. Dinner that night was silent. Mom made a pot roast, Lucas's favorite. She cut the tenderest center slice and wrapped it in foil, putting it in the fridge. "Just in case he stops by and he's hungry," she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. They looked at me not as their savior, but as the cruel warden who had almost sent their baby boy to jail. The gratitude was gone, replaced by a quiet resentment. I went up to my old room. I took my service pistol out of its lockbox and began to clean it. The smell of gun oil was comforting. It was honest. I disassembled the slide, wiping away the carbon, my motions mechanical and rhythmic. Downstairs, the house was silent. No laughter, no warmth, just 2 old people missing the son who had tried to destroy them and fearing the daughter who had saved them. I looked at the disassembled weapon on my desk. I had won the war for the house, but I had lost the family inside it. Who exactly was I protecting? And in this house, who was protecting me? The peace lasted for exactly 3 months. It was a fragile porcelain kind of peace, pretty to look at. But one wrong move would shatter it into a million jagged pieces. It broke on a Tuesday night in November. A storm was hammering Naperville, the kind of Midwest gale that rattled the windows in their frames. I was in the kitchen, finishing a cup of tea, when the pounding started on the front door. It wasn't a knock. It was the desperate, rhythmic thud of a body throwing itself against the wood. My hand instinctively went to the knife block. I pulled out a chef's knife and moved to the hallway. Dad was already there, fumbling with the deadbolt, his hands shaking. "Don't open it, Dad," I warned. But he did. And Lucas fell into the foyer like a sack of wet cement. He was unrecognizable. His left eye was swollen shut, a purple lump the size of a golf ball. His nose was clearly broken, skewed to the side, leaking blood onto the hardwood floor. His designer clothes were ripped and soaked with rain and mud. "Help me," he wheezed, spitting blood. "Mom! Dad! They're coming!" Mom screamed from the top of the stairs. She rushed down, ignoring the blood, and wrapped her arms around him. "My baby. Oh God, Lucas, who did this to you?" "The Russians," Lucas sobbed, burying his face in Mom's nightgown, smearing it with red. "I owe them money, $50,000. I tried to double down to win back the house money, but the app cheated me. They said if I don't pay by tomorrow, they'll burn this house down with everyone inside." $50,000. The room spun. My parents looked at me. It was that look again. That familiar, suffocating look of helplessness. They weren't looking at me as their daughter. They were looking at me as the fixer, the shield, the bank. "Alina." Dad's voice cracked. "We can't let them kill him." I looked at Lucas, cowering on the floor, using our elderly parents as human shields against his own consequences. I hated him in that moment. I hated him more than the insurgents who had shot at me in the desert. They were honest enemies. Lucas was a parasite. But I couldn't let mobsters firebomb my parents' house. I grabbed Lucas by his collar and hauled him up. I slammed him against the wall, my forearm pressing against his windpipe. "Listen to me," I hissed, my face inches from his. "I am going to save your worthless life, not for you, but because I will not let Mom and Dad bury a son. But this is the last time. From this second forward, you are not a civilian. You are my recruit. You live by my law." I dragged him to the kitchen table. I grabbed a notepad and a Sharpie. "The Baxter Rules of Engagement," I said, slamming the pen down. "Rule number 1. You get a job at the distribution warehouse on Route 59. I know the foreman. It is brutal, back-breaking work. Your paycheck gets direct deposited to me to pay back the debt. Rule number 2. Random drug and alcohol screenings, weekly. Rule number 3. You slip up once, 1 minute late, 1 failed test, and I throw you out and text your location to the Russians." Lucas nodded frantically, tears streaming down his bruised face. He signed the paper with a trembling hand. He would have signed a deal with Satan himself to stop the pain. In a way, he just did. The next night, I drove Lucas to the meet. It was a dive bar on the outskirts of Chicago, a place where the floor was sticky with stale beer and the air smelled of cheap tobacco and violence. I left Lucas in the car. "Stay down," I ordered. I walked in. I wasn't wearing my uniform, but I wore my field jacket and my boots. I carried myself with the kinetic energy of a loaded weapon. The bartender looked at me and looked away. 3 men were sitting in a booth in the back. They were thick-necked, wearing leather jackets, looking like they carved people up for sport. I walked straight to their table. I didn't sit. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. It contained every cent of my combat savings. Money I had bled for, money I was saving for a quiet life. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "Principal only," I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the jukebox. "The interest is canceled." The man in the middle, the leader, laughed. He had gold teeth. "That is not how it works, little girl. The VIG is—" I leaned in, placing my hands on the table. I stared into his eyes with the 1,000-yard stare I'd perfected in a war zone. "I am not a little girl," I said softly. "I am a staff sergeant in the United States Army. That money is all you get. If you come near my house, if you even look at my family again, I won't call the police. Police need warrants. Police need probable cause. I have a unit of brothers who are itching for a live fire exercise." The leader stopped laughing. He looked at the money, then at my eyes. He saw that I wasn't bluffing. He saw that I was more dangerous than he was because I had nothing left to lose. He nodded once, slowly. "Take the boy. We are done." I walked out, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my hands steady. I got back into the car. Lucas was curled up in the fetal position in the passenger seat. Did you pay them?" he asked. "I bought you," I said, starting the engine. "Now you belong to me." I drove us home in silence, the weight of my empty bank account pressing on my chest. I had saved him, but I felt like I had just made a deal with the devil. Have you ever had to sacrifice everything for someone who didn't deserve a dime? If you know this heavy feeling, hit that like button so I know I'm not carrying this burden alone. And tell me in the comments, type iron rules if you think I did the right thing by forcing him to sign that contract. Lucas thought the nightmare was over because the Russians were gone. He was wrong. His nightmare was just beginning, and I was the drill instructor. The first month under my iron rules passed, not with the discipline of a boot camp, but with the suffocating tension of a prison holding cell. I'd emptied my entire life savings, $50,000, to keep Lucas breathing. That money was my safety net, my future down payment on a small cabin in the woods. Now, it was gone, vanished into the pockets of Chicago loan sharks. To rebuild and to keep the lights on in a house that felt increasingly like a mausoleum, I took a second job. By day, I managed the logistics for a trucking company. By night, I worked armed security at a commercial complex in Aurora. I was sleeping 4 hours a night. My eyes felt like they were filled with sand. My body ached with a fatigue that went down to the marrow. But when I came home at 6 in the evening to cook dinner, because Mom was too frail from the stress and Dad was too depressed, I didn't get a thank you. I got Lucas. He would drag himself through the back door after his shift at the distribution warehouse, looking as if he had stormed the beaches of Normandy. He collapsed into his chair at the kitchen table, still wearing his neon safety vest. "My back is killing me," he groaned, dropping his head onto the placemat. They had me on the loading dock all day, 8 hours of lifting 40-pound boxes. It's inhumane, Alina. Seriously. I set a plate of meatloaf down in front of him. I'd been standing for 12 hours straight in combat boots. "It's called work, Lucas," I said, my voice raspy. "It pays the bills." "My hands were made for holding a pen, or a controller," he muttered, flexing his fingers dramatically. "Not for manual labor. I'm wasting my potential." Mom hurried over with a bowl of warm water and a towel. She knelt on the linoleum floor, my mother, with her arthritic knees, and began to unlace Lucas's work boots. "Oh, you poor thing," she cooed, massaging his ankles. "You're working so hard for this family. Just relax, honey. Mom's here." I stood by the sink, gripping the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. They were treating him like a returning war hero because he worked a standard shift at a warehouse, while I was literally bleeding my bank account dry to clean up his mess. To them, his suffering was a tragedy. My sacrifice was just expected duty. The resentment started to rot me from the inside out. It got worse when I checked in with his foreman, an old friend from my reserve unit. The report wasn't good. Lucas was mastering the art of quiet quitting. He was doing the absolute bare minimum not to get fired. He spent cumulative hours in the bathroom, avoiding the floor cameras, scrolling through TikTok. He showed up 5 minutes late, then 10. When I confronted him about it in the hallway, he didn't even look ashamed. He looked annoyed. "I go to the job, don't I?" he snapped, his eyes glued to his phone screen. "Get off my back, Alina. You paid the debt. Great. Does that mean you own my soul? Are you my sister or my warden?" "I am the person keeping you out of a body bag," I shot back. "If you lose this job, you violate the contract, and I will throw you out." "You wouldn't," he sneered. "Mom wouldn't let you." He was right, and he knew it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I walked into the living room and saw Lucas sliding a $20 bill out of Mom's purse, which was sitting on the coffee table. He froze when he saw me. Then, with a casualness that made my blood boil, he shoved the bill into his pocket. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice low. "Relax," he said, grabbing his car keys. "I just need a pack of Marlboros and a couple of scratch-offs. I'm feeling lucky today." "You're stealing from her," I said, stepping in his path. "After you lost their house, after you almost got them killed, you are stealing their grocery money to gamble?" "It's $20, Alina. It's pocket change," he shouted. Mom walked in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's all the yelling?" "He's stealing from you, Mom," I said, pointing at his pocket. Mom looked at Lucas, then at me. Her face softened. Oh, Alina, it's fine. I told him he could take a little if he needed it. He works so hard. He needs to blow off some steam. She was lying. I knew she hadn't told him. She was covering for him, enabling the very addiction that destroyed us, just to keep the peace. I looked at them, the coddling mother and the parasitic son, and I felt a wave of isolation so strong it nearly knocked me over. I was the villain in this house. I was the mean, unfeeling soldier ruining their happy little delusion. Fine, I said, grabbing my gear bag for my night shift. Blow off steam, just remember the rules. I left for work, but a knot of unease tightened in my gut. That night, I came home early, around 3 in the morning, for a surprise inspection. The house was dark. I walked silently down the hall to Lucas's room. I cracked the door open. Lucas was awake. He was lying on his bed, whispering into his phone, the screen illuminating his face with a pale blue glow. He was smiling, a manic, excited smile I hadn't seen in months. Yeah. No, she's at work, he whispered. Tomorrow night. Definitely. I can get it. When the floorboard creaked under my boot, he jumped. He slammed the phone down and shoved something under his pillow. His eyes darted around the room, wide and guilty. What do you want? He demanded, his voice cracking. Can't a guy sleep? Who are you talking to? I asked. No one, just a podcast. Get out, Alina. I stared at him for a long moment. My intuition, honed on the streets of Fallujah, was screaming at me. The enemy wasn't defeated. He was regrouping. He was planning an ambush. Go to sleep, Lucas, I said, slowly closing the door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with my gun oil and my rags, waiting for the sunrise, knowing that the storm hadn't passed. It had just been the eye of the hurricane, and the trailing winds were about to tear the roof off. The call that ended my brother's life, at least the life he had in my heart, came at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I was at my security job, patrolling a dark parking lot, when my phone buzzed. It was Mike, the foreman at the distribution warehouse. Alina, look, I'm sorry to bother you, Mike said, his voice awkward. I just wanted to offer my condolences. I didn't know until today. I stopped walking. Condolences? For what? For your dad, Mike said. Lucas has been out for 3 days. Bereavement leave. He said his father passed away suddenly. The world tilted on its axis. My blood didn't just boil, it evaporated. He hadn't just skipped work. To get out of lifting boxes for a few days, Lucas had looked a man in the eye and killed his own father with a lie. He had cursed the very man whose roof was keeping him dry. My father is alive, Mike, I said, my voice shaking with a cold, lethal rage, but Lucas is done. I clocked out early. I drove home through a torrential downstorm, the rain hammering the windshield like machine gun fire. My hands were squeezing the steering wheel so hard I thought the plastic might snap. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw it. The house wasn't mourning, it was vibrating. Thumping bass from a trap song shook the front window panes. Purple and green lights flashed from inside. And the smell, even through the rain, as soon as I opened my car door, the skunk-like stench of high-grade marijuana hit me. I unlocked the front door and walked into a nightmare. My parents' living room, usually a sanctuary of quiet and order, looked like a frat house after a bender. Red Solo cups were scattered everywhere, spilling sticky beer onto the carpet. A haze of smoke hung in the air. 5 or 6 strangers, kids with neck tattoos and saggy pants, were sprawled on the furniture. But then I saw the mantelpiece. Above the fireplace sat the most sacred object in our house, a triangle-folded American flag in a cherrywood case. It was the burial flag presented to my grandmother when my grandfather, a World War II veteran, was laid to rest. One of Lucas's friends was leaning against the mantel, using the flag case as a coaster for his sweating beer cup. A ring of water was soaking into the wood. Get out! My voice wasn't loud. It was a low growl, like a tank engine turning over. The music stopped. Lucas stumbled out of the kitchen, holding a bottle of vodka. He was shirtless, sweating, his eyes glazed and wild. Yo, look who's back, he slurred, swaying. The warden. Party's over, guys. Drill sergeant is home. Where are Mom and Dad? I asked, stepping over a pile of trash. They went to bed. Lucas waved a dismissive hand. They didn't like the music. Total buzzkills. I looked down the hall. The door to the master bedroom was shut tight. I knew they weren't sleeping. They were hiding. They were cowering in the dark, terrified of their own son and the strangers he had invited into their sanctuary. I snapped. Everybody out, now! I roared, grabbing the kid by the mantelpiece by his collar and shoving him toward the door. If you are not out in 10 seconds, I am breaking limbs. They scrambled. They saw the look in my eyes, the look of someone who had cleared rooms in Fallujah. And they ran. Hey, you can't treat my guests like that, Lucas screamed. He smashed the vodka bottle against the counter, shattering the bottom, holding the jagged neck like a shank. You ruined my night, he spat, swinging the glass wildly. You always do this. You come in here with your uniform and your rules, acting like you're better than me. You're just jealous because I'm the golden child. Mom loves me. She tolerates you. I didn't flinch. I stepped inside his clumsy swing, grabbed his wrist, and twisted. He screamed as the glass fell to the floor. I swept his legs, and he hit the hardwood with a thud that shook the house. I flipped him over and pinned his arm behind his back, pressing his face into the beer-soaked rug. I paid your debt, I hissed into his ear. I saved your life. And you cursed Dad to die so you can get high? Let me go, Lucas shrieked, thrashing uselessly. I hate you. You think you're a hero? You're just a bully. I wish you never came back. And then, he said it. The words that severed the last thread of DNA connecting us. I wish you had died in Iraq, he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. If you had stepped on an IED, we would have gotten $400,000 from your SGLI insurance. We would be rich. We wouldn't need you. We would just have the money. The silence that followed was louder than the storm outside. He didn't want a sister. He wanted a payout. To him, my life was worth less than the policy check. I stood up. I wasn't angry anymore. I was empty. I grabbed him by the waistband of his jeans and the scruff of his neck. I dragged him to the front door like a bag of garbage. He was kicking and crying now, realizing he had gone too far, but it was too late. I opened the door and threw him down the concrete steps into the mud and the rain. Alina, no! Mom's voice came from the hallway behind me. She was weeping, reaching out. Don't throw him out. It's storming. I didn't look back at her. I looked at Lucas, shivering in the mud, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. Mission complete, I said. You are not my brother anymore. I slammed the heavy oak door. I threw the deadbolt. Click. It was the sound of a casket closing. I stood there, listening to him pound on the door, listening to my mother sob. And for the first time in my life, I felt absolutely nothing for him. Have you ever had a family member say something so cruel that you instantly stopped loving them? If you believe that some lines can never be uncrossed, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments, type deadbolt if you would have locked that door and never opened it again. The house was safe, but the silence inside was about to kill us all. The week that followed Lucas's exile was not peaceful. It was a vacuum. The house was clean again. The smell of stale beer and marijuana had been scrubbed away with bleach and lemon oil. But the silence that replaced the chaos was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like the cabin pressure in a descending aircraft. It felt less like a home and more like a morgue. Dinner became a nightly torture session. My parents and I sat at the dining table, the only sounds being the scrape of stainless steel forks against china plates and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. They didn't look at me. They stared at their food or at the empty chair where Lucas used to sit. Their eyes were hollow, filled with a silent, screaming accusation. You did this. You banished him. Dad was the first to show the physical toll. He had always been a strong man, a retired union pipe fitter with hands like vice grips. But in just 7 days, he seemed to have aged 10 years. His skin took on a gray, waxen pallor. He spent his days sitting in his recliner by the front window, staring out at the driveway, his hand absent-mindedly rubbing the left side of his chest. You're cruel, Alina. Mom finally broke the silence one evening. Her voice wasn't angry. It was trembling, which was worse. It's been raining for 3 days. Where is he sleeping? What is he eating? What if the Russian men find him? I put my fork down, my appetite gone. Mom, I am saving him. If we keep cushioning his fall, he will never learn to stand up. He needs to hit rock bottom. I don't care about your lessons, she cried out, covering her ears like a child. I don't need your logic. I need my son. You treat this family like a platoon, Alina. But we are not soldiers. We are just people. I looked at Dad. Dad, tell her. Tell her he threatened you. Tell her he wished I was dead for the insurance money. Dad didn't look up. He just let out a shallow, wheezing breath. I just want peace, he whispered, rubbing his chest again. I'll be dead soon enough, and then you two can stop fighting over my grave. The words hit me like a physical slap. I watched him struggle to breathe after climbing the stairs. I wanted to take him to the emergency room. I suspected stress-induced cardiomyopathy, broken heart syndrome. But every time I mentioned a doctor, he waved me off with a stubbornness that was terrifying. He had given up. I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. The guilt was a toxic gas filling every room. I needed air. I made a decision that I would regret for the rest of my life. I volunteered for a 4-day training exercise at a base in Wisconsin. It was a short temporary duty assignment. I told myself I was doing it to give them space, to let the tensions cool down. I was lying to myself. I was running away. Before I left, I spent an afternoon upgrading our security. I installed 2 hidden cameras covering the perimeter, one facing the driveway, one covering the backyard. I connected them to an app on my phone. The night before I was scheduled to leave, I saw him. I was lying in bed, staring at the blue light of my phone screen. The motion sensor triggered. A grainy black and white figure was skirting the edge of the fence line. It was Lucas. He wasn't coming to the door to apologize. He was circling the house like a vulture waiting for an animal to die. He looked thin, his hoodie pulled up over his head, his movements jerky and paranoid. He knew I was home, so he kept his distance. He was waiting for me to leave. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. He was no longer my brother. He was a hostile entity probing the perimeter. I went downstairs the next morning with my duffel bag packed. I stood by the back door with Mom. I'll be back on Sunday, I said, gripping her shoulder. Mom, listen to me. I saw him on the cameras last night. He is watching the house. Do not unlock this door. Do not let him in. If he wants to talk, he can call me. Promise me. Mom looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed and evasive. Okay, Alina, have a safe trip. She didn't promise. I drove away with a knot in my stomach the size of a fist. That night, 200 miles away in a sterile barracks room, my phone pinged. A motion alert at the back door. I opened the app. The video feed loaded. I saw the back porch light flicker on. I saw the handle of the back door turn. And then, I saw my mother's hand reach out and slide the heavy brass deadbolt to the left. Click. She left the door unlocked. She left the latch open, a silent invitation, a beacon of blind, foolish love for the prodigal son. She thought she was leaving a light on for her boy. She didn't realize she had just unlocked the gates of hell. I tried to call her. No answer. I stared at the screen, helpless, watching the empty porch, knowing that the predator was out there in the dark, and the sheep had just opened the pen. The notification that ended my world didn't sound like a bomb going off. It sounded like a standard digital chime, a ping from my phone sitting on the nightstand of a cold barracks room in Wisconsin, 200 miles away from home. It was 2:14 in the morning. I rolled over and grabbed the phone, my heart already hammering a warning rhythm against my ribs. I tapped the security app. The screen loaded, the little buffering circle spinning for an agonizing second before the live feed from the kitchen camera popped up in grainy, black and white night vision. I stopped breathing. Someone was in the kitchen. It wasn't a stranger. It was Lucas. But he didn't look like the brother I'd grown up with. In the harsh infrared light, his eyes looked like 2 black holes burned into a skull. He was shaking, his movements jerky and erratic. He was scratching at his arms, sweating through his hoodie. He looked like a junkie in the throes of withdrawal, a desperate animal scavenging for a fix. He hadn't broken in. He had walked right through the back door, the door my mother had left unlatched. I watched, paralyzed, as he tore through the kitchen cabinets. He wasn't looking for food. He was looking for cash, for silver, for anything he could pawn. He moved to the hallway cabinet where Mom kept her prescription painkillers for her arthritis. He ripped the door open, sweeping bottles onto the floor, cursing when he found them empty. Then he turned toward the master bedroom. "No," I whispered to the empty barracks room. I pressed the microphone button on my screen. "Lucas, stop." The audio lag was terrible. My voice came out of the kitchen speaker a second later, tinny and distorted. He didn't even pause. He kicked the bedroom door open. Through the camera angle, I saw the hallway light spill into the dark bedroom. My father, Robert Baxter, stepped into the frame. He was wearing his old plaid pajamas. He looked frail, but he stood tall, blocking the path to my mother. "Get out, Lucas," Dad said. The microphone picked up his voice, trembling but firm. "We have nothing left for you. Leave us alone." Lucas didn't leave. He lunged. "Don't lie to me," Lucas screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "I know you have the pension card. I know Alina gave you money. Give it to me. I need it." He shoved Dad. It wasn't a punch. It was a desperate, violent push against the chest of a man whose heart was already broken. Dad stumbled back. His legs hit the edge of the bed frame, and he collapsed onto the hardwood floor with a sickening thud. A framed family photo, taken when we were kids at Disney World, fell from the dresser and shattered. Dad didn't get up. He rolled onto his back, clutching his left arm. His face, illuminated by the hallway light, twisted in a mask of absolute agony. His mouth opened, gasping for air that wouldn't come. "Dad!" I screamed at my phone. "Dad!" Lucas froze. He stood over our father, breathing hard. He looked down at the man who had raised him, the man who was currently clutching his chest, his skin turning a dark, hypoxic gray. Dad reached a shaking hand up toward Lucas. "Son." Dad wheezed, the sound wet and rattling. "Help. Phone. 911. This was the moment. This was the split second that defined a soul. Lucas looked at Dad's hand. Then, his eyes darted to the floor. Dad's old leather wallet had fallen out of his pajama pocket when he hit the ground. Lucas looked at the dying man. Then he looked at the wallet. I can't stay," Lucas stammered, backing away. "The Russians. I have to pay them. I'm sorry, Dad." He didn't reach for the phone. He reached for the wallet. He snatched it up, stuffing it into his hoodie pocket. He looked at Dad one last time, not with love, not even with regret, but with the cold, selfish panic of a coward. "Lucas!" I shrieked, my finger pressing so hard on the screen I thought the glass would crack. "Call 911. He is dying! Lucas!" My voice echoed through the empty kitchen, a digital ghost haunting the scene. Lucas turned and ran. He bolted out the back door, disappearing into the night, leaving the door wide open to the cold wind. On the floor, Dad's hand fell limp. His chest heaved once, twice, and then stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and final. 10 seconds later, my mother crawled out from the ensuite bathroom where she had been hiding. She saw Dad lying amidst the shattered glass of our family portrait. "Robert," she whispered. She crawled over to him, shaking his shoulders. "Robert, wake up. He's gone, Robert. You can wake up now." When he didn't move, she let out a sound that I will hear in my nightmares until the day I die. It wasn't a scream. It was a long, low wail of a woman whose universe had just imploded. I sat on my bunk, 200 miles away, staring at a small screen in the dark, watching my mother rock my father's lifeless body. I was a soldier. I was trained to save lives. But I couldn't save him, because the enemy wasn't a terrorist. The enemy was my brother, and the weapon wasn't a gun. It was a wallet. My father was dead, and Lucas Baxter had murdered him for $40 and a debit card. The sky wept for my father, even if his son did not. It was raining harder than I had ever seen in Illinois. a relentless, freezing downpour that hammered against the stained glass windows of the Grace United Methodist Church. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wool, lilies, and old hymnals. I stood at the position of attention next to the open casket. I was wearing my Army service uniform, the dress blues. My trousers were pressed sharp enough to cut skin, my shoes shone like black mirrors, and the gold stripes on my sleeves caught the dim light. I was a statue carved from grief and discipline. My mother sat in the front pew in her wheelchair. She was heavily sedated, her head lolling to the side, clutching a damp handkerchief. She looked small, shrunken by the enormity of the loss. The honor guard had just finished folding the flag. I watched them with a critical eye, counting the 13 folds, listening to the sharp snap of the fabric as they pulled it taut. It was a perfect triangle of blue stars, the final shield for a man who had been stripped of everything else. The bugler began to play taps. The mournful, lonely notes drifted through the sanctuary, tightening the throats of everyone present. It was the sound of a final goodbye. And then, the heavy oak doors at the back of the church crashed open. The sound was like a thunderclap, drowning out the bugle. A gust of wind and rain swept into the vestibule, extinguishing the votive candles. Heads turned. A murmur of confusion rippled through the pews. Lucas stood in the doorway. He looked like a drowning rat. He was wearing a black suit that was clearly borrowed. The shoulders were too wide, and the pants pooled around his ankles. He was soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. But it was the smell that reached me first. Even from 30 feet away, over the scent of flowers, I could smell the cheap, sour reek of whiskey. He didn't stand respectfully. He stumbled. He grabbed the edge of a pew to steady himself, swaying dangerously. "Dad," he wailed. His voice was loud, slurred, and theatrical. "I'm here, Dad. I made it." The silence in the church was absolute. The disrespect was palpable. He hadn't come to pay respects. He had come to perform. He was making my father's death about his grief, his redemption, his scene. He began to walk down the center aisle. He bumped into an elderly aunt, nearly knocking her over, and didn't apologize. "I'm sorry I'm late," he shouted at the coffin, tears streaming down his face, tears that meant nothing. "Traffic was a killer. But I'm here now. Your boy is here." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a thread, it was a steel cable. The discipline that the Army had drilled into me for a decade evaporated in a single heartbeat. I broke the position of attention. I stepped away from the casket. I walked into the center aisle to meet him. Clack, clack, clack. My low-quarter shoes struck the marble floor with a rhythm that sounded like a drumbeat of war. I didn't rush. I walked with the terrifying purpose of a predator closing in on wounded prey. Lucas saw me coming. He stopped, swaying, a sloppy grin spreading across his face. He opened his arms wide as if expecting a hug. "Sis," he slurped. "Alina? We're orphans now, huh? Come here." I didn't slow down. I didn't say a word. I planted my left foot, twisted my hips, and threw a right hook with every ounce of hatred, grief, and rage that had festered in my soul for 3 years. Crack! My fist connected squarely with his jaw. The sound was sickeningly loud, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. It was the sound of bone meeting consequence. Lucas's head snapped back. His legs turned to jelly. He fell backward, crashing onto the marble floor, sliding 2 feet in his wet clothes. Blood sprayed from his nose, splattering onto the pristine white runner carpet. Gasps filled the church. The pastor took a step forward, horrified. "Alina, please." I ignored them all. I marched over to where Lucas lay groaning, clutching his face. I grabbed him by the lapels of his oversized suit coat and hauled him up to his knees. I dragged him toward the casket until his face was inches from the wood. "Look at him," I screamed, my voice raw and animalistic. "Look at what you did!" Lucas tried to pull away, whimpering, blood bubbling from his nose. "My face? You broke my face." "You broke his heart," I roared, shaking him so hard his teeth rattled. "He died on the floor because you took his wallet instead of calling 911. You killed him for $40, Lucas. Look at him." I pulled my arm back to strike him again. I wanted to destroy him. I wanted to beat the selfishness out of his body right there in front of the altar. No! The scream came from the front pew. It wasn't the pastor. It was Mom. She tried to stand up from her wheelchair, her frail body shaking. Stop it! Alina, stop! Don't hurt him. He's your brother. My fist hovered in the air. I looked at my mother. Her husband was lying in a box, dead because of the boy she was protecting. And even now, in the shadow of the cross, she chose him. She would always choose him. The fight drained out of me. My hand dropped. I let go of Lucas. He scrambled backward on his hands and knees, slipping in his own blood, terrified of the monster his sister had become. He looked at me, then at the congregation staring at him with judgment, and he broke. He turned and ran, scrambling down the aisle and out the open doors into the rain, fleeing like the coward he was born to be. I stood alone in the center of the church. My chest was heaving, my right hand was throbbing, the knuckles split and bleeding. I looked at my hand. It was stained with my brother's blood. I turned back to the casket. I placed my bloody hand on the polished wood, leaving a red smear on the mahogany. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and fast. I'm so sorry. The rain pounded on the roof, washing the world outside, but nothing could wash away the stain in this room. The family ended here, not with a prayer, but with a punch. 2 years have passed since the rain washed my brother's blood off the marble floor of the church. I hung up my uniform, for good. I received an honorable discharge, trading the desert camouflage for the gray sweatpants of a civilian. I couldn't justify carrying a rifle to protect a nation when I had failed so spectacularly to protect the people under my own roof. Now, I work as a physical trainer for the VA hospital, helping veterans with PTSD learn to trust their own bodies again. It is quiet work. It is honest work. I still live with Mom in the old house. She has aged 10 years in the last 2. She moves slower now, her hands trembling slightly when she pours tea. She spends a lot of time sitting by the window, watching the seasons change. We never speak his name. Lucas became a ghost word, a taboo syllable that would shatter the fragile peace we had constructed if spoken aloud. But today was different. Today was the 2nd anniversary of the day my father's heart stopped beating. I drove Mom to the cemetery on the outskirts of Naperville. It was late October, and the Midwest was putting on its final fiery show before the winter death. The maple trees lining the cemetery roads were exploding in colors of burnt orange and deep crimson. The air was crisp, smelling of dried leaves and wood smoke. I parked the car and helped Mom into her wheelchair. We moved slowly along the gravel path toward the veterans section. From 50 yards away, I saw someone was already there. I stopped. My first instinct was defensive, my muscles tightened, preparing for a confrontation. But then I looked closer. The figure kneeling by my father's headstone wasn't the pale, shivering junkie in the oversized hoodie I remembered. This was a man. He was wearing work boots coated in white limestone dust and heavy canvas pants stained with mortar. His skin was dark, baked brown by the sun and wind. His shoulders were broad, the muscles defined under a tattered thermal shirt. It was Lucas. He didn't hear our approach over the crunch of the dry leaves. He was busy clearing away the dead grass around the marker with his bare hands. His movements were deliberate and respectful. I signaled Mom to stop. We waited in the shadow of a large oak tree, listening. Lucas reached into his pocket. He didn't pull out a flask. He didn't pull out a pipe. He pulled out a small, humble bouquet of wildflowers, goldenrods and asters that he must have picked from the roadside. He placed them gently against the gray granite. "Hey, Dad," he whispered. His voice was different, too. It was deeper, raspy from inhaling construction dust. "I wanted to tell you. I got my 1-year chip yesterday." He paused, wiping his nose with the back of a calloused, scarred hand. "I'm working masonry now, hod carrying. It's brutal work, Dad. My back hurts every day. But it's good pain. It's clean money. I pay my own rent." He let out a shaky breath that turned into a white puff in the cold air. "I didn't bet on the game last Sunday. I didn't even watch it. I just wanted you to know. I'm trying. I'm so sorry, Dad." His shoulders began to shake. He wasn't performing for an audience this time. He was weeping. These were the tears of a man who had hit the absolute bottom of the abyss and was clawing his way back up, inch by painful inch. Mom let out a small gasp. Her hand flew to her mouth. She started to push the wheels of her chair forward. "Lucas," she breathed. I put a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her. "No, Mom," I said softly. "But he's crying, Alina." "He's sorry," she pleaded, looking up at me. "I know," I said. "But let him stand. If we go over there and coddle him, if we hand him a tissue and tell him it's okay, we undo everything. He needs to carry this weight. It's the only thing keeping him sober." Lucas heard us. He froze. He slowly wiped his face and stood up. He turned around. For a long moment, the three of us stood there, separated by 20 feet of autumn leaves and a lifetime of regret. He looked at Mom, and I saw a flicker of the old longing in his eyes, the desire to run to her and be comforted. But he didn't move. He looked at me. He saw the sister who had paid his debts and the soldier who had beaten him bloody in a church. There was no hatred in his eyes anymore, just a heavy, solemn understanding. He knew the boundary line I had drawn was permanent. He straightened his back, he looked at me, and he nodded, just once. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness. It was a salute. It was an acknowledgement that I had done what was necessary. I looked at my brother, the construction worker, the recovering addict, the man, and I nodded back. He didn't try to speak. He picked up his hard hat from the grass, turned, and walked away toward the service gate. He walked with a limp, perhaps from the work, perhaps from the scars. He walked alone, his shadow stretching long and thin over the gravel path. I watched him go until he disappeared behind the row of cedars. I stepped up to the grave. I placed my hand on the cold stone next to his wildflowers. "You see that, Dad?" I whispered. "He's working. He's living." A gust of wind blew through the trees, scattering a shower of gold leaves around us. For the first time in 2 years, the crushing weight on my chest lightened. I hadn't saved the Lucas of the past. But maybe, just maybe, my cruelty and my father's death had purchased a future for the man who just walked away. It was a terrible price to pay. But it was the truth. I turned the wheelchair around. "Let's go home, Mom," I said. And for the first time, the word home didn't feel like a battlefield. It just felt like a place to rest. Looking back, I realized that the hardest battle I ever fought wasn't in the desert, and it wasn't against my brother. It was the battle against the instinct to enable him. We often think that love means cushioning the fall, but I learned the hard way that true love sometimes means letting someone hit the ground so they can finally learn to stand up. My parents' kindness became a cage that kept Lucas sick, and it cost my father his life to break that lock. If you are holding someone up who refuses to walk, remember this. You aren't helping them, you are crippling them. Real love requires the courage to set boundaries, even when it breaks your heart to do so. I shared my scars with you today not for pity, but for connection. I know many of you are fighting your own wars behind closed doors, dealing with addiction, betrayal, or the agonizing guilt of practicing tough love. You are not alone in those trenches. If my journey gave you even an ounce of strength or perspective, please honor my father's memory by hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications. It helps us keep these stories alive. And talk to me in the comments below. Have you ever had to cut ties with a family member to save them or yourself? I will be reading your stories tonight.